Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be dialing in from the world today. My name is Sarah Liu. I'm the founder and the managing director of the Dream Collective. I'm really excited to be having this conversation and hosting this event, Energizing Our Future, with the leaders from Viva Energy Australia today. We'll be kicking off shortly. We'll just give it about 1 more minute for audiences to dial in, and we'll kick off in about 30 seconds. All right, a big warm welcome once again for everybody dialing into Energizing Our Future today. Together with the Chief Executive Officer and the Chief People and Technology Officer, Scott and Amanda from Viva Energy Australia, I'm so excited to be welcoming every single one of you to the discussion today. I'm the founder and managing director of the Dream Collective. We are a global diversity, equity, and inclusion consultancy. We operate globally, but we're headquartered in Australia. And we actually started a partnership journey with Viva Energy close to probably a year ago now. And we embarked on the journey together to really help and support Viva Energy in building best practice in diversity and inclusion strategy practices for them internally. And that was an exciting partnership and still is an exciting project for us and our team at the Dream Collective, because Viva Energy is a leading energy company that actually supplies about a quarter of Australia's fuel requirements. And so about 20% of everything that moves around in Australia is actually fueled by Viva Energy. And I think that's just such an incredible mission. And we were, throughout the journey, we were actually really, I suppose, touched by Viva Energy's really genuine commitment in the DE&I space. And I think it's not every day that we come across companies and leaders who are genuinely really invested in that space and really always thinking about ways where we can stretch that diversity and inclusion muscle to take the organization to the next level. So really excited to be unpacking some of those experiences and those lessons with Scott and Amanda, and to share that with all of you who are dialing in today. We have here at the Dream Collective, we have a global presence and impact. And I know that actually a number of you are dialing in from global locations. So we have actually worked with 18 different locations across the world. And we've got 4 different global location offices servicing our clients across the APAC region and across a wide range of industries as well, but specifically focus around the technology and energy and professional services field. Without further ado, really keen to actually launch into the conversation, because I think we've talked a little bit about Viva Energy and what it does, but really there's nothing probably better than to really understand about a company's culture and who you are, not just what you do, from the leader's perspective. So Scott, this morning I might actually start with you to talk us through a little bit about the culture at Viva Energy. I know it's very much driven by people. So let us know what it is and what it means, and how do you foster that culture at Viva?
Thanks, Sarah, and look, thanks very much for having Amanda and myself join with you today. It's great to be with you and everyone that's joined in online as well. So look, I mean, Viva Energy, the industry we're in obviously is the downstream, what we call the downstream oil industry. So in simple terms, that includes, in our business at least anyway, a refinery and import terminals that bring in, as you said, supplying about 25% of the country's fuel requirements, and all the service stations that, in our case, are branded Shell, that probably everyone's very familiar with around the country, but also supply a large number of commercial sectors across the country as well. Our business has been, well, the industry we're in has really been a relatively unchanged business for a long time. We started in Australia at the beginning of the last century, so we've been here for about 120 years. Obviously our business started as Shell and now Viva Energy, but whilst a lot has changed, a lot is very similar to what we used to do over 100 years ago. And when we look across at our competitors, what our competitors do as well is remarkably similar to ourselves as well. Now, with new energies, all of that is changing, of course, and we'll probably talk a bit about that later. But the one thing that really, at the end of the day, differentiates ourselves from our competitors ultimately is our people. And so, I think that's what makes a difference to our customers. It's what makes a difference in terms of our operating performance, and it makes a difference in terms of how we tackle some of the challenges and opportunities that we see in the future as well. So as a result, we've had a real strong focus on defining our culture around our people, because we really do believe it's what makes the difference in terms of our performance as a company and how we compete in a marketplace that looks very similar. And try and create an environment that ultimately gets the best out of our people, and encourages people to bring their best to work as well, and obviously contributes to their career and personal development, and provide a fulfilling role. Now, every company probably wants to do the same thing. I think we've just really tried to embed our culture in that philosophy, and that's why we sort of tag it as driven by people. But everything we do is largely organised to try and really make that the defining culture of the company. So it starts, I think, we can talk about this and perhaps take some questions on it through the course of the session. But I think it really starts on almost day one with people joining the company. We try and get very early on, for example, people together in what we call our Welcome to Viva Day, which pre-COVID was an opportunity for people to come to Melbourne, have a meeting with myself and some of my exec team, and where we get an opportunity to talk about the company and talk about the culture and what we are trying to achieve, and obviously welcome people to the company as well, and then get them to get out and see some of the operations that we have around Victoria, to get a real quick immersion in the company. But I think that helps set the scene around how important people are. There's not many companies, I think, that are able or do that, have that level of commitment on day one with people, and it really helps to set the scene around how important our employees are to the success of the company.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Scott. And as Scott mentioned, we will actually be taking questions throughout the session today. So please make sure that if you've got any questions for either Scott or Amanda or all of us, make sure you populate that in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And Amanda, I might actually unpack your experience a little bit. You've got such an incredible experience as executive at an executive level, working across retail, fast food, and FMCG, and then transitioning into oil and gas, which is very, very different. So I want to unpack that a little bit. What expectation did you have? And did you have a bit of a shock coming into the industry? What was that like for you?
Yeah, great question. Hello, everyone. It's really nice to be here. I think for me, coming into the industry, I'll probably talk about the attraction first. The attraction was really about an industry that's in transformation and in transition with new energies and those sorts of things. So from my perspective, the industry made sense because it's something that's how I love to work. I like to work in industries that are on the forefront of those transformations, and that's what I've done throughout my career. So that was a big tick. And I think, when you're the chief people officer, one of the things that's really important to you is your partnership with the CEO. And the other attraction, of course, having just heard from Scott as well, is very passionate about people. So those two things were really easy decisions. When two things that probably were a bit surprising coming into this industry. The first was probably around the time horizon. So, one of the things working in fast food and fast moving consumer goods is we've been on the forefront of what I call rapid fire transformations, because the customer has sort of demanded those sorts of changes. And I think we're getting there, but the horizon's probably a bit longer as we're thinking about transitioning, an industry that's been around for, over 100 years into a different type of company and different type of industry. So I think and so with that comes inherent, challenges around how do you keep the hearts and minds, and how do you really engage that through what I call a bit of a longer burn transition as that industry does that. I think, I was lucky. I actually started as a graduate in Mars, so I'm quite used to and had, sort of grew up with engineers. But I think one of the other misconceptions in the oil and gas industry, if you like, is that the company clearly has a lot of engineers, and most people sort of perceive engineers to be very introverted, much more focused on process rather than people. But I think one of the things that's been great about joining Viva is, yes, all those things are true, but actually the thing that's not true is about the introversion. So engineers are very extroverted when they really want to be, and really engaging. And I think for Viva, our engineers in the company are really committed to people, because at the end of the day, you can have great processes and great technology, but I think we're very aware that that's driven by people. So I think that's what's really attractive about Viva and about this industry.
Yeah, I love the comment you made there that engineers can actually be extroverts when they choose to be and want to be. And that's certainly our experiences working really deeply in the sort of technology space.
Because I couldn't remember, Sarah, are you an engineer?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
But we work with a lot of engineers. Yeah. And that's probably where I want to sort of unpack and go a bit deeper, Amanda, with your career transitioning experiences. Because something that we do here at the Dream Collective is we help organizations actually attract diverse female talent. And a lot of times they come from a completely different background and experiences. And sometimes what we hear is that talent tend to think that that's a disadvantage rather than an advantageous edge that they can have. So what was your learning there? Like, what was that was different about you, but that enabled you to actually be successful in this new industry of oil and gas that you find yourself in? And what competitive advantage you actually brought because of that diverse perspective?
Okay. Well, Scott might want to answer this as well, but I think when I think about my career and making transitions across, as you said, quite a number of industries, and in fact, over 3 continents as well. So I've worked in the US, I've worked in Europe, and across Australia and Asia as well. So I think from, one of the things that I think has sort of been the cornerstone of that transitions for me has been my real interest in people and curiosity around the industry. So really trying to learn the industry deeply, but being able to apply what I'd say is some core capability around change and transformation. I actually did my master's in organisation change in London. And so, because I was just so fascinated about all the organisation behaviour pieces, but it's not just that, it's also the process change that needs to happen in the organisation, the structural change that also needs to happen. And so I think that curiosity, that really desire to keep learning, and I'm learning every day. Scott helps with that learning, particularly because there are parts of this business that, people have been around for a long time and understand how things invariably work. So when you're looking at changing those things, you do need a deeper understanding. But, personally, I think having, a really deep curiosity, being very sort of methodical about how you think about wanting to make those transitions is really important and has been important for me.
Great. And Scott, anything to add there from a different perspective?
I think one of the things about our industry is that you have significant impact in people's lives. If you actually sit back and think about the products that we sell, there's really no one in Australia, or no business in Australia, or no consumer that doesn't rely on what we do to get around, get to work, pick up the kids from school, run a business, and it's a big part of already driving Australia's economy. So it's always good to remember that, because in our sector, because you actually have significant leverage and a significant ability to make change as well. Now, it's obviously a business that industry that hasn't necessarily changed a lot over time, but we're entering a period now with new energies and obviously a real focus on reducing emissions, and whilst that has a direct impact on what we do, we actually have a significant ability to manage and lead that change as well. So leveraging our people to bring new ideas and new ways of approaching a changing marketplace, right, is so critical to our future, and people bringing people into the organization that have different experiences and have outside of our industry is really important for us in terms of setting ourselves up for the future, and getting the right blend with people that have been around for a long time as well, like myself, and trying to get the best of both the experience and the new ideas is really a next evolution, I guess, of our driven by people philosophy. So.
Yeah, and I think we've actually just asked the audience to respond to a poll question around the type of workplaces that they are actually looking for. And I think it touched on a couple of things that we have starting to speak about already. One is flexible working arrangement, which we know is top of mind for employees across the world, not just Australia these days. But one thing they talk about is a diverse and inclusive environment. I think, even seeing the two of you, bring that different diversity to the leadership team, that's been fantastic. But actually, I want to look a little bit deeper around that. How do you build an inclusive workplace and organization and Viva? And I think recently you've actually introduced, I think it was Australia's first full-time superannuation payment for all employees on parental leave and during part-time work periods for up to 5 years. And I think that was actually, I think, really pioneering in the industry. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. Why was that important that you do that and take ownership of that in the industry? And what has been the impact of this policy?
You want to go first, Amanda? Or
oh, yeah, you go, Scott. No.
Yeah, I think, look, I'll let you speak about the detail of it, but I think you need to look at this in the context of a broader objective around pay equity and creating a level playing field for all people that work in the company. I mean, Australia's pay gap currently sits at 14% at total REM, and so that essentially means men get paid on average 14% more than women do. That's obviously not a great statistic, and one that we need to address. In Viva, our pay gap at base level is basically zero, and that's, you'd expect that, because that's an easy thing to achieve. You pay people the same for the same job, right? But it widens out to more than 4% and up to 9%, depending on the population we look at in our organisation at a total REM level, because we have in our industry, and it's the same everywhere, set of allowances and payments that to go to workers to essentially pay them for lack of flexibility. So this is in an operating environment, people earn overtime, they earn shift allowances for working, night shifts, etc. And you're essentially rewarding people for being giving up some flexibility to meet the company's operating mode. So because those areas of our business have fewer women represented in those roles, as a result, your pay gap widens, of course. Now, the way to address that fundamentally is to make your workplace more attractive to both genders and increase the representation of women in all roles in the organisation. And if you do that, then you provide some of those benefits that currently more males get than women, because you've got increased representation, your pay gap will reduce, and you create a more equitable workplace. So that's a key strategy for us. We've been working on. We've made some good progress. It's it's taking time, but I'm really proud of the progress we have made in that area. But we're still taking it a step further by saying, well, actually, it's not just about total REM that drives a pay gap. There's other hidden gaps that exist as well. And one of them is the fact that when people take parental leave, whilst there's a period of paid parental leave, there's also, for the most parents, a period of unpaid leave that people take. And then people come back and often on a part-time basis because they want to try and get the balance between work and obviously home care, right. And so that creates a further pay gap because people are out of the workplace for a period of time. They're not necessarily getting paid, and they're certainly not getting paid superannuation because of the decisions that they've had to make. And super, of course, has a compounding effect because if you, in your early parts of your career, if you're not putting enough money away in super, it really hurts you as you get close to the environment. And it hurts women more than it hurts men because women, as you know, play the dominant role in that primary parental care. So the program we put in place to ensure that people's superannuation contributions continue while they're on parental leave and when they come back on part-time basis at a full-time level ensures that at least on that component, no one takes a step backwards, whether it's a man or a woman, in terms of looking after that important job of caring for children. So that was leading at the time. We've had a few companies have followed since, but I think it's part of that whole, that whole sort of objective to really create equality and tackle the pay gap that exists and make our contribution. But in making a contribution to that is setting a higher bar and encouraging other companies to follow, which has been what we've seen since we launched that. I don't know if I've probably stolen everything you were going to say.
Probably everything I was going to say, Scott. I think the only thing that I'd add, I think that was awesome. Yeah. So the thing that I'd add is that, to Scott's point that, and I had a daughter 17 years ago. So I was in a similar situation where, we shouldn't be disadvantaging women in their careers or, financially, because it's with us to have sort of maternity leave. At that time it wasn't even called parental leave. So we've sort of come a long way, which is fantastic. So, from our perspective, it's great to be pioneering, but it's also great to see other companies following. And that's, I think, the beauty of being a pioneer, is that other companies can learn from us. So we've seen a lot of companies follow suit, and I think that's really fantastic. And and it is an investment. We've invested $1 million over that time since the introduction to ensure that, and predominantly that's impacted a lot of women in our business, because that's the majority still are taking the parental leave. So that's a really good outcome on both perspectives, from an industry and leading Australia and other companies following, and also making sure that our people taking parental leave are not disadvantaged. So it's great.
Yeah. And I think when people talk about it in concept, everyone's really behind it and say, yeah, makes complete sense. But I think it's when the rubber hits the road and that commercial tension can really come about. Was there difficult conversations that had to be had internally? And how would you recommend companies that is currently going through that process to navigate that?
Yeah, so it was a bit before Amanda's time when we implemented. So probably maybe I'll speak to that, Amanda, if you like. But no, I don't think it wasn't a very difficult conversation at all, Sarah. I think it was led by Amanda's predecessor at the time, and it was really led in the context of that general philosophy to take progressive steps to reduce the pay gap, and to think about the pay gap in a much more broader way as well. And I think when you sit down and listen to the arguments and the impacts that that we're trying to overcome, it makes perfect sense. And I think everyone on the exec team at that time was fully supportive of it once I understood what was the problem we were trying to solve for here. And of course, and it's and I think there's many more things that can be done and need to be done in this area, and it's only a start. But I think it just helps, as I said before, it helps to lift the bar progressively, and I think generally have the right discussion around the different roles of men and women at home, and how that impacts people's careers and people's earning potential, and the importance of actually taking steps to resolve and make that more equitable. So.
Great. Excellent. And I think we've started talking about representation, especially in the senior leadership team at Viva. So when it comes to oil and gas, the industry that you're in, I think people's first perception would be it will be extraordinarily male dominated, and particularly, Amanda, in your role that actually oversees the technology function too. But our understanding is that the female representation and senior leadership team at Viva is actually relatively strong. So Amanda, can you talk us through a little bit about that, and what impact has that diverse representation had on the organization?
So I think it's been a very concerted effort from Scott, the executive team, and our senior leadership group to really balance the levels of female representation across our business. So we've seen some really great programs. So there's been probably on two. So if I think about embedding sort of these sorts of changes, there's probably two areas that we really focused on. One was sort of innovative practices. So and then the other piece was structural changes. So I'll sort of talk a little bit about that. So in terms of some of the structural changes, there's been things like looking at our Geelong refinery, for example, which historically has been really male dominated. And from our perspective, being very focused on our graduate program, but also our operators who we put in, if you like, a female operator program. And what we did is structurally looked at two things. One is it takes on average about 10 to 12 years to be really, really competent as an operator in a refinery. And historically, we looked at probably the background of being trade qualified. And so that really prevented a lot of women from applying for that, because even that qualification was underrepresented from a female perspective. But in fact, when you looked at the time it took for operators to become really competent, a lot of that's on the job training. It's learning on the job. And yes, some of the sort of trade background might come into effect, but not really, because we also have a maintenance department where we've got trade qualified people. So when we looked at it, we said, well, actually, you don't need to have that trade background, and it's actually preventing us from tapping into a pool of people that could be great operators for us in the future. So we sort of had to change our thinking and our historic bias as to how we recruited people into those roles, and then structurally change the roles to be able to be done in a part-time capacity, which was therefore attractive for also balancing that gender representation. So another example is in our supply chain. We've looked at roles that, again, historically have been male dominated. So that's our refuelers. And, recently in Kalgoorlie, we actually went under a full restructure and structural change where we enabled some of those roles to be done as a job share. And so not only in a remote area, we structurally changed some of our working practices to that arrangement to enable more women to participate. So I think it's both a leadership piece, and I think it's a deliberate policy and practice and structural changes that you need to work through. And that's helped us at our operator and our entry-level roles into the organisation. And then we have practices and things that we do, obviously, when we recruit for the more senior roles and more, sort of non-traditional roles as well, which I think most of the people on the call would be sort of appreciative of those sorts of practices. Things like making sure that you have a diverse interview panel, make sure that your candidate pool coming in has that diverse representation and those things. So I think they're really important. I don't know, Scott, if you wanted to add some more things to that.
Yeah, I think I would like to add a few comments. So when you think about executive positions in Australian companies. So if you look at the ASX 200, which we're a part of, women make up about just over a quarter of positions at executive level in Australian companies, which is obviously, well below where you would want it to be. But if you break that apart a little bit, so in functional roles, women make up 40% of positions in ASX companies and only 14% in P&L line roles. And that in part leads to the fact that at the CEO level in Australian companies, there's only 11 CEOs in that ASX 200. So there's many reasons why that's the case, but one of the big reasons is that there's not that pipeline being developed of women working in the sort of core P&L roles that ultimately tend to lead to progression into CEO level roles. So one of the challenges for us, Australian companies generally, is obviously to build a pipeline to see more women appointed to executive level roles, but particularly into P&L roles. Now we've got in our exec team, I've got 6 executives. 2 of those executives are women. So Amanda, who runs people and culture and technology, but she also has a P&L part to that in terms of the Shell Card business as well that she runs. And then Megan Foster runs our retail business, so the service station business everyone will be familiar with. So we're not at 50% representation of the executive level. We have signed up to a commitment to, particularly through HESTA, to get to 40% at the executive level, which obviously for us is, it's one extra position, no doubt, into which we'll obviously be able to achieve in time. But I think it's really important that businesses also create those opportunities for women to lead material P&L roles and help to build that broader pipeline, not just in our company, but for all ASX, all companies, to build a much stronger pipeline into CEO levels so that we can increase the levels of the most senior people in business in Australia over time. And we have an important part to play in helping to provide that pipeline. So
yeah, I think what came through in both of your commentaries was actually leadership intent, right? Leadership intent, that deliberateness, which led to, formation of structures and policies and frameworks. And a lot of times those decisions and intent are set by leaders, which, traditionally are occupied, and not traditionally, still, to this day, occupied by men, particularly in large scale, if we look at the ASX 200 companies. So engaging men in this gender equality and diversity and inclusion conversation is absolutely critical. So maybe, Scott, I might start with you and I'll get Amanda's perspective as well. But how do you engage everybody to be on the journey together, to be as important as you are, and to be a role model and actively champion that allyship? And I'm sure it's not all that simple and straightforward. And how do you navigate some of those challenges?
Yeah, look, I think intent is obviously important, and in some ways that's the easy part to tackle. So it's not hard to get buy-in for and a commitment to achieving gender balance and other forms of diversity within the company as well. I think that's increasingly well understood, and it's not the hardest part of it. The rubber hits the road when you actually take action to make these things happen. Okay, so that's when you start to make deliberate actions around recruitment, around design of roles to support more flexible working, to encourage more women into the workplace, start to tackle some of the behavioural norms in the workplace to make it more inclusive and more supportive of diversity and particularly women joining the workplace. That's where the change has to happen, and that takes determination. And you then have to deal with the sort of the biases and the response that you get from people in the organisation to what has become material changes to the way you've done things in the past. So equipping people to manage that is really important, because that's the only way you do make progress. You can have all the wonderful intents and say all the right things, but until you actually make things make change, then nothing really changes. So so that's probably where the most important investment has to take place, and that comes from setting the tone at the top, being deliberate about it, making the decision, supporting the changes that need to happen, having the conversations as the rubber hits the road and some of the issues start to be surfaced, and supporting managers, particularly mid-level managers, who ultimately have a huge role to play in supporting this change. It's quite easy to get top level on board. You've got to go deeper in, because they're the people that have a big influence on the actual culture within the company and how people feel and the experience they have when they join the company as well. So I think the conversations that occur and being visible about that are important in terms of helping people know that that's the direction we're heading and they're supported in that, but also helping people think about how to support the change as well. So I think it's not perfect. It's not easy to do, particularly in a large organisation where you have a lot of people you have to try and influence. But the changes you make are part of the process of getting people, obviously having those conversations and making progress. And I think we've had some good successes in some pretty tough areas over the last few years, and it hasn't been easy, to be honest, for particularly women joining a workplace that is heavily male dominated. I don't underestimate how difficult that can be at times, despite all the support we put in as well. And they're very much the pioneers. It gets easier for future generation, future people that join, but they have a really important role, and it's really important we support them in that. So.
Great. We've got a number of questions rolling in, which was great to see. So anyone, if you've got questions or even comments that you want to sort of bring to the conversation, please do drop it in the Q&A box. And I think, we've got some specific questions around how do you support women to advance in Viva? And you can provide some sort of key 2 or 3 high level, I suppose, initiatives or specific examples of how you are supporting women with that career progression. That'll be fantastic.
You start, Amanda?
I'll start. Yeah, so obviously some of the specific initiatives is that we are very, again, deliberate, intentional about having a women in leadership focus. So part of that is availability to have mentoring in the company, but also specific programs. So we've partnered with some of the leading people in this space. So Melbourne Business School is an example of where we've really sort of what I'd call double down on women that are emerging. It's certainly our emerging talent as well, women, and some of what we'd say is some of the biases and learning from some of the women that have been before them and pioneering in this space. And also we broaden that to make sure that where we've got managers, because invariably you've probably got women that are emerging leaders that have got male managers. Yeah. So what are some of the things that they can also do to support women in their leadership and in the development of their impact, particularly in a male-dominated cultures where you get inherent biases that can come through. So I think it's got to be sort of a bit end-to-end, I would say. So it's not just supporting emerging leaders, but it's also supporting the organisation to ensure that the women can thrive in that environment. So there's really, and we're about to launch a Women in Leadership Forum as well within the organisation. So Megan and I, who is the Executive General Manager of Retail that Scott talked about, so I'm one of my peers on the exec team, because I think one of the things that we do know is when other women look up and can see the change and can see the modelling and can understand that it can actually happen, I think it's on Megan and I, part of our responsibility as part of the exec team, to share our learnings and have those fireside chats and sort of lead that in the organisation. So It does, as I said, I think we've talked about being very deliberate, but and we wouldn't be, many organisations are doing that. So, in many places we can take those learnings as well.
Yeah. And so if you were to ask your employees today, we've got another audience question coming through. If you ask your employees how Viva Energy is inclusive day to day, what example do you think they will give you?
Yes, it's a good question. And look, it is an area that we have started to put a lot more focus on. So we're refreshing our leadership development programs at the moment to really have a strong lens on inclusive leadership. Because, I think it's one thing to drive a diversity program and improve in the case of gender, improve the representation of women across the organisation. Is quite another thing to lead a genuinely inclusive workplace that values everybody that joins the company and the unique experiences and skills that they bring, and creating an environment where people are comfortable to be themselves in a workplace. So that's, again, it's that's a bit about evolving the culture and making that more explicit in terms of our expectations on leaders to create that sort of environment. And so that's why it sort of embeds itself quite neatly into the leadership behaviours and leadership development programs that we've evolved as well. And we're sort of about to launch a bit with our senior leadership group in a few weeks' time. But that comes from the philosophy that it's all very well to go and have a driven by people culture and recruit the best people you can and improve and generally improve and create a more diverse workplace. But if you're not create that environment, people can bring their best to work, then clearly you're not getting the best out of that investment that you're making in your people. And so you want people to come to approach their tasks, work within their work groups and feel really free to express themselves and bring their ideas to the table. And so I wouldn't say for a second that we have that nailed. That's absolutely that's all upside potential for our company if we get that right, and which is why it's got that strong focus going forward from here. Having said all that, I feel we have done a lot in this area, and we have a good environment that does support people already. We try and run a pretty flat organisation as much as we can. In some parts of the business lend itself more to that than others, but that gives people a lot of access to the senior leaders in the company and creates quite a lot of engagement between not just the senior leadership, but also the executive team as well. And I think that gives people a really unique exposure to what's in the minds of the leaders, where we're heading strategically, and I think helps equip people to feel confident in bringing their ideas to the table, because they know a lot more about where the company's going, and hopefully humanises the leadership a bit more than you would experience in a lot of other companies as well. And I know through my engagements with other CEOs and other companies that the way we do run things in Viva is a bit special and a bit different than a lot of our larger corporates. And as we continue to grow and get bigger, it's something I'm pretty keen to maintain that sort of that general accessibility that people enjoy within our company. So,
and I think, Scott, one of the things that we've probably learnt through the pandemic, which in many ways has been a positive side of the pandemic in the way that we work now. If you think that historically, sort of working flexibly has largely been in the domain of women, and often dialing in from home, on their days, or dialing into meetings and things, and just the nature of those meetings not being particularly inclusive, by just the virtue of the function that they might be working from home or working flexibly. And I think during the pandemic, with kids schooling from home, or all those things that have sort of all range of experiences that people have had with working from home, I think has really, really sort of broken through this flexibility and inclusive in terms of how you think about engaging people who might be remote, and working flexibly, all those things. So I think we actually just continue to leverage that part of our ways of working out of the pandemic, and the fact that a lot of our male colleagues, including you, Scott, had to experience that. It's just been it's a totally different way of working, and a lot of ahas for our male peers and male colleagues that actually they've had to look after kids and be on calls and juggling all that has largely been, and still probably to this day still sits with women, but women trying to juggle all that, I think has helped through this way of working through the pandemic.
Yeah, and we're definitely seeing the whole person actually being
Yes.
brought into the workplace and conversation. I think holistically speaking, we are seeing, I think, the pandemic help accelerated inclusion in a way. I think it's created a lot of burden in different pockets, and as a result, as an organization, we need to navigate through that. But overall, I think the sense of belonging, inclusion, I think will and might get harder because then everybody's remote. But I think we're moving towards the right direction. And I think personally, I can also share examples of inclusion that we've observed from Viva. I remember actually us hosting an inclusive leadership workshop with the senior leaders, and we invited the more junior staff to come in and actually share their experiences on a panel. And I think the level of openness and authenticity from the employees talking about, how their managers actually, without asking, created a prayer room for them, on the sites, and actually creating promotional opportunity and initiating those conversations and guiding them through that. I think they are all great examples and things that we often take for granted, because inclusion, and that's why I love that question, because inclusion is built in the day-to-day, right? You can have all the amazing policies, but when rubber hits the road again, like the day-to-day experience is created by these daily interactions. So I thought the level of psychological safety those employees were able to demonstrate by being comfortable in that forum and speaking and spoke like the way they did was really very much testament to Viva Energy's culture.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Very nice.
Right.
That's good. We don't seem to have a problem of people speaking their mind.
Yeah.
That's my experience anyway.
That's a cool problem to have, isn't it?
Yes.
Indeed.
Yeah, but actually, how do you cultivate that? Because we do come across leaders who say, hey, we really want people to speak up, but they don't. So what is it that you're doing that people can probably take a page out of your book?
Well, I do think, again, like most things, it's setting the tone a bit at the top. And I do think the accessibility people have to leaders is really important. I think having the ability, and perhaps think on my career, the ability to sit in a room with someone a couple of levels above you and get the sense of what they're thinking, and then be part of the conversation actually is quite helps break down a lot of barriers, to be honest. But I think also letting, and if you touched on it, is letting managers be drive inclusiveness and even things like flexible working in a way that makes sense for the work group as well, right? We're a pretty diverse business in terms of the things we're involved in the geographies that we are working, and allowing managers to sort of drive their work group in their area and provide flexibility for their team based on what they need is really important. And some of the examples you touched on were things that people have developed on their own because they feel free and supported to make those sorts of decisions. And that's been a bit of a journey. I think, as Amanda said, COVID has been really helpful in that regard, because we've all been, we haven't got the ability to get out and visit work groups and be part of that the way we've had in the past. So leaders in areas have literally just had to get on and make decisions and make things happen, and continue to service our customers. And I think that's really empowered people in a way that we hadn't done before, just through the circumstances. And I think it's helped us move forward as a company quite a lot. We've had a good uplift in engagement over the last couple of years. I think, like a lot of companies have experienced as well, because of that environment, and people have felt really supported through some pretty uncertain times, and I think have also been able to develop their careers in ways that they wouldn't have done previously. So it's been very good.
Amanda, anything to add there?
No, I think Scott captured that well. I think when organisations, I do think very deliberate in this space, it really helps. So, as I said, we're very fortunate that we get that role modelling from the very top as an organisation. And, Scott's, even in meetings, we all encourage. So we have listening sessions with our teams, and, Scott has, regular calls with the senior leadership group each week. So those sort of forums, they can see the humanistic side of the business and see that we have a banter. And so I think that just resonates through the organisation. That's what I'd call that shadow resonates through the organisation. Yeah.
That's a great point, because a lot of times I think leaders tend to focus on, how do we get people to speak up? But actually what's important is what happens after your employees have spoken up, because people learn from that experience and they get reinforced or they get deterred either way. So I think that leadership response is such a key piece to consider. And we've got a audience question here, a bit more specific around the role your L&D, learning and development team, can play as part of this, I suppose, DEI, building best practice and hiring, company structure, workplace flexibility. How closely do you work with your L&D team on that, and to what level is the involvement?
Well, I could start and say Scott's actually our Chief People Officer. So it makes my job very easy because he has a direct, so for anyone that is a people and culture or HR leader on the forum, I do generally say at times I think Scott is the Chief People Officer as well as the CEO, and that's a great thing, yeah. So he has a direct line into my people and culture team. Very passionate about learning. As Scott talked about, we have, we're about to launch what we call our new leadership or reinvigorated leadership framework, which is called Smart with Heart. And within that, in the heart piece, if you like, we are doing a lot around inclusive leadership. And as your company's been partnering with some of this development as well, Sarah. So those leadership interventions are crucial when you're thinking about an organisation's behaviour maturing. And so I think they're the things that I would say, Scott's passion, my passion, the exec team's passion, and we have very open discussions about what are those sort of interventions and development programs we can put into the company.
And off the back of that, how do you share that passion around? Like, how do you make sure that everybody has that passion across the organisation?
You go, Scott.
That's right. No, I was just going to say, look, I think, Amanda's probably right about occasionally me being the Chief People Officer, but
that's a good thing, Scott.
I think sometimes I'm probably too involved, but I think one of the good things about the company is that it's sort of a size that you can get to know a lot of the people across the company. We're 1,200 people, and if you think about what we do, actually, that's massive leverage per person in terms of the impact we have in markets. So, over time, it's not hard to actually get to know people in the company, and it's particularly when you're able to travel. And in some ways, Zoom's actually COVID's brought a lot more people into my sphere, if you like, than I probably have had in the past. But and having been around for a long time, like I have in the business as well, you do obviously get to know people pretty well, and so that is not lost on people, because I do invest time in getting out and meeting and being part of the operations and spending time with people at all levels of the company, and so that obviously sets the tone. And as a leader, you should never underestimate how impactful the things that you say and you do are on those around you as well. And so that naturally drives the same expectations on the way I manage my time in the company, and obviously sets expectations on others around me as well. So I think that's a key part of it. But But look, I think it's the reason I spend a lot of time on it, apart from the fact I do value the people that work in the company, and is I enjoy seeing people develop and grow, and every CEO will have a legacy that they want to obviously leave behind when they finally leave the job. And for me, leaving behind a company that has materially changed for the better and is more diverse and more reflective of the world around us, and really more inclusive and supportive of the people that work there, is kind of the legacy that I want to leave behind. And the only way I can drive that legacy, of course, is to be actively involved in making it happen as well. Now, I need everyone around me to obviously make that happen as well, but I'm personally invested in that, and I think that reflects a bit in how I run at least my job. So.
Yeah, great. And we've actually got a couple of commentaries in the comment section from Viva employees actually who are dialing in today. And I think both of them talked about top down. And I think that once again demonstrates the importance of actually a leader-led approach, because so much of the culture is set by the top leadership. So really great to see that today. And then sort of last 3 minutes, I want to do like a lightning round, because we still do have questions rolling in, which is fantastic. Probably a quick one around what advice would you give to small businesses, to follow your people first philosophy, pioneering things, would they do anything differently?
I flip it around a bit, actually, because I see a lot of small businesses with some absolutely fabulous cultures, because it's in many ways, it's a little bit easier to achieve, because the leader of those small businesses oftentimes heavily, massively invested in it, or is the owner of that business, and drives a very strong personal culture around it. And because it's a small business with smaller workforces, it's very easy to make that real for everybody in one place. And I've got relationships through the company with small businesses as partners or customers, and I see that regularly, and that's actually what inspires me the most. So I would never underestimate the impact that small businesses have in reverse with larger companies like ours. It's obviously more challenging for us to achieve the same outcome because of the span and the need to work through many layers or many levels to achieve the same outcome. But I think that sort of inspiration that you get from some of the small companies that are doing a really great job in this area is certainly really helpful for me in terms of inspiring and motivating me. So
yeah. And Amanda, I might throw the next one over to you, which is how do you engage international workforce, or I think just remote workforce in general in today's world?
Gosh, what a great question. We don't have an extensive international workforce, but I might draw on some of my experience working particularly in young brands, which had a global 1 million workforce. And I think it's really around the people leadership. So very clear around sort of the role of people in the organisation, the role of the manager, and then being able to translate that culture into the local business. I think it's sort of having, I guess, freedom within a framework, and I think has seen the way that I see it work best with international locations.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Scott, Amanda, and everyone for dialing in. I think that was such an action-packed hour. We got through everything from culture to diversity, inclusion, examples, COVID learnings, and all the way to career transition, learnings. So lots covered and lots of question and answers. So really glad that we got there. You will see on the screen here where you can actually go to both to continue the conversation or the discovery with the Dream Collective as well as Viva Energy. I think we talked a lot about this, people first culture, and it will be really great for you to actually see that for yourself. We've got the Viva Energy career site up here. So So really encourage you to just take a browse. I know that many of the people who are on this call today are at that stage where you might be looking for a career transition or new opportunities. And, really to, I think, take Amanda's learning. Just because you come from a different industry, it doesn't actually disqualify you. In fact, it will actually give you an outsider advantage. And also feel free to, please do actually sign up across the Dream Collective platforms so that we can keep you posted on all the resources, materials, and future events to come. So thank you all once again for a fantastic hour together. And thanks so much again, Scott and Amanda, both Chief People Officers, as we've learned today, from Viva Energy, for your just genuine, authentic sharing. Thank you so much today.
Thanks very much for having us, Sarah. It was great. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.